Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and we're going to talk about what the full court press from the OSR on the Shadowdark RPG, what it means, and what it tells us about the 2023 Manic Panic, 2023 OGL Crisis, and what it means for, what does the Shadowdark RPG mean for Dungeons & Dragons today, and particularly in context to the OSR's full court press of support for this brand new tabletop role-playing game. So let's talk about this. All right, so one, let me just define what I mean by full court press. There's something really unique happening right now, right? The OSR is, in my humble opinion, quite famous for being one of the most divided, confused groups within the tabletop role-playing game community, right? Last year, they had open discussion across many channels. Is the OSR real? What does OSR mean? Is it old school revival or old school rules? And then people coming in and saying, it's both. And others going like, we should really be able to define what our actual acronym stands for. And you know, like the parents are fighting in front of the kids here. Like, we've really got to settle down and actually cohesively go toward one goal. And the reason why is the OSR is now, even back last year, there was some recognition that it was in competition with D&D, right? Now, on the other side of the 2023 Manic Panic, and whenever I say 2023 Manic Panic, what I mean is the 2023 OGL Crisis, right? So, on the other side of the 2023 Manic Panic, what we really, you know, there's complete clarity now, right? The OSR is massively in competition with Dungeons & Dragons directly, right? And it is not a zero-sum game. There's 3 points on the board. OSR wants to have 3, and they want D&D to have 0. D&D wants to have 2, and they want OSR to have 1, right? So both groups want to win, right? The difference is the OSR actually wants the Dungeons & Dragons to be gone altogether. And actually, that is understandable because even the memory of Dungeons & Dragons is a massive threat to the OSR, right? Like, and the reality is, as long as there are, D&D 5e PHPs, and a player can waltz over and, you know, like, can you imagine a player looking at the D&D 5e Player's Handbook compared to, Shadowdark? Like, you bring a new player in and you're like, hey, here's Shadowdark, and you're like, this is the size of a novel, right? And then you look through it and there's no color, and then that same person just looks through a 256-page hardback Dungeons & Dragons book with art from literally the best fantasy artists in the world, full color, much larger, much better organized. You know, like, this is not GarageBand energy. It's like, you're almost like, is this an amateur product compared to a professional product? Like, what are you serious that you want me to take these two things equally? And the OSR is now in that position. They're like, yeah, we really do want you to consider, like, Shadowdark is an actual competitor to Dungeons & Dragons. And the idea, and the wink, nudge, and, and this is our best energy, and we're just going to serve up whatever we want, and we're doing our thing. All that's gone now, right? Because the OSR in January of 2023 was like, we can replace Dungeons & Dragons, right? Now, is it all on them? What about the OGLers and the orc, right? Well, that's a good question. It is all on the OSR now. And the reason why is the OGLers, so first of all, the OGLers are off the board, right? And the reason why was like, we want the OGL to be supported, right? And Hasbro completely outmaneuvered them, and utterly killed the OGL in the 2023 OGL Crisis, and released it under Creative Commons. And now the OGL doesn't even matter, right? Like, it's like nobody would ever use it, right? And so there was just a devastating blow to the OGLers. And the other thing is, people knew, like, they're like, we're never going to get a win out of the OGLers. They literally are derivative copiers. They're never going to defeat the source, right? This is a parasite. The only question is this parasite actually going to kill the host, right? So nobody really ever expected a win from the OGLers. And I think the OSR and the orcs absolutely are like, hey, we need numbers, so you OGLers can help us. We know we're never going to get a win from you. Like, the OGL is never going to produce a book that's even better than the worst Dungeons & Dragons D&D canon hardback, right? And everybody knows that, so nobody was ever looking for the OGLers for a win, right? The OSR is saying, hey, we can replace D&D, and so now we're in the shut up and put up era, right? Like, where you'd have to actually put some stuff up and say, hey, look, this is better than D&D. And that's what's happening right now with Shadowdark RPG. And Professor Dungeon Master, Ben from Questing Beast, Runehammer, Mastering Dungeons, Teos Abadia, Ghostfire Games, everybody who matters, who is even remotely connected to the OSR, is full court press supporting Shadowdark role-playing game. And the reason why is it's brand new, right? Oh, I'm sorry, let me get all the way there on describing the OGL and the OSR and the orcs who's going to deliver a win, and why this is all on the OSR now, right? So the OGLers were off the table. The orc, they just got off the table, right? And so Project Black Flag just came out, and from Cobbled Press, and actually the orc, right? The open role-playing creatives, right? First of all, they've produced nothing, right? And that's the issue, is you literally have days or weeks to get something out, and the orc has done nothing significant. Also, people are looking at Project Black Flag now, and it put out its first playtest, and it was utter garbage. It was literally 10 pages that assured everybody, hey, here's what's going to happen. We're going to take D&D, we're going to pour it into a new bowl, and call it Black Flag. And everybody was like, are you guys joking? Like, it's got to have some new ideas. And they're like, no new ideas, just a different label. All right, did you guys think we were going to beat D&D? We're essentially copiers. And so the orc has pulled itself off the table completely, right? Now, OSR is different, right? They're like a good example, Runehammer Games. They are OSR adjacent, right? That's another thing. It's a lot of people who are like OSR supporters don't even want to say they're OSR. Perfect example of this is King Waspinator over on Total Party Skills. I actually had a whole conversation with him. He's like, you're saying I'm an OSR voice? I'm like, yeah, you publish by your own words, you wrote an OSR game that you'd identified as OSR, published this OSR game, and are continuing to publish it today. Yes, if you wrote an OSR game, published an OSR game, and are actively an OSR publisher today, you're OSR, right? But he's like, no, I'm not, right? And I'm like, and so you get this thing where you get all this confusion in the OSR itself, right? But the confusion is stripped away at this point, right? There was so much noise put up by the OSR saying, D&D be gone. We can literally replace it. We're saying, get rid of Dungeons & Dragons because we will replace it for you, right? And then there was this conversation of the OSC, the DCC, and the Pathfinder, right? These are like the top tier OSR games. And people are like, wait, you can't point to those as being able to beat D&D. They were out for years, and D&D crushed them, right? And that's why we arrive at this point in time where the OSR is 100%. They're like, we can no longer pretend not to know what OSR means. We have to know that. We also have to have solidarity, right? If we're going to beat Dungeons & Dragons, we literally have to produce. We have to set our differences aside. There has to be something real, right? And Kelsey Dion arrives, with fully formed tabletop role-playing game in hand at the perfect time to say OSR can beat Dungeons & Dragons, right? And it is the first true competitor out of the gate, right? And the OSR, I want OSR to lose, right? I want them decimated. I want 10% cut right off their top, right? And I want it to happen every day until there's just 10% left, right? I want them to lose. But I'm going to give them their flowers when they earn their flowers, right? They realized this is what the OGL crisis, the OGL 2020, the 2023 OGL crisis, the 2023 Manic Panic was about. It was an arrival of the actual question, right? And the question is, who's going to be at the top, right? And the OSR stripped away its artifice, right? And stripped away its excuses and say, we want to knock you off the hill, right? And now the OSR is like, we squawked a lot of noise. We said, Hasbro did it wrong. We know better, right? And we've reached a point where words aren't enough. Words aren't enough. Words aren't enough. We actually need products. We need real competition, and we need to show that we can put up and shut up, right? Like, we're at a point where the crying in the streets and the DND be gone shouts are finished, and we actually need to deliver on the promise. So that is something I'm really impressed with. I think when you look at Professor Dungeon Master, when you look at Runehammer games, when you look at Mastering Dungeons, when you look at Ghostfire games, when you look at company after company after company that is OSR adjacent coming out, right? When you look at Questing Beast, right? And channel after company after reviewer coming out and praising and doing more than praising. Like, these aren't even reviews. These are essentially advertisements for the game. And the reason why is they desperately need this to be here. They need to say, we told you we could replace Dungeons & Dragons, and here's our attempt. They have not even remotely succeeded, right? But I will give them credit. They understand what this moment means. They understand, the OSR understands the shut up and put up moment, right? It's time to stop talking and start doing, right? OSR, you said you could do better than Hasbro. Did you? Well, first of all, Shadowdark RPG, let's just talk it through, right? Art, absolutely abominable trash. Like, to put up black and white art today and have the same GarageBand energy and say, when Dungeons & Dragons has 40 books on the shelf done by the best fantasy artists in the world, right? Really what you're doing when you put up black and white is you're saying, we're not even going to attempt to compete, right? So D&D absolutely destroys Shadowdark RPG from the perspective of art. Let's talk about layout. I'm going to give a few more points to Shadowdark layout. So one of the things is I've been seeing the way they present monsters, and they present monsters essentially in a card format, right? So on a single playing card, you can have a Shadowdark monster. This is absolutely gorgeous, brilliant layout done by Shadowdark RPG, and it allows them to really make a concise presentation of a monster. And honestly, this should be doable by Dungeons & Dragons. The fact that it's not doable by Dungeons & Dragons at this point is really bad, especially within the books themselves, right? However, you take this brilliant layout element, right, and you put it in utter garbage layout in the rest of the book, right? And the reason why the layout is utter garbage is it goes back to the black and white art. There actually is good space use in the book, and there's actually an attempt to do decent layout, but once you look at Shadowdark RPG and you realize that the surrendering of no color in the book is abominable, right? And the reason why is when you look at like Dragonlance Shadow Dragon Queen, right? So you have a 2-page layout, and there's a brand new you look at the book and here's the new chapter, right? And you have a 2-page layout, and an entire page is given to art, and then it flows over and takes half the next page, and then the introduction of the chapter is one column with huge font at the top, right? And this chapter, its colors actually match the region in the book, right? So when they get to Kalamon, there's fall colors, right? And when you get to the Northern Wastes, it's this tanned, washed out color, right? And just the color alone is like, watch this. And then they have banners, and they have magic items, and they're all beautiful color across the board. And it gets right, and the reason why it's so bad in Shadowdark RPG is there's always been this question, right? Is more? And D&D is like, yes, more is more. More pages, right? We're getting rid of 64-page modules and soft covers, and we're giving you full color art, and we're giving you amazing layout that uses color, right? And then OSR is like, no, less is more, right? Like, you should play a dirt farmer. You don't want to be a exciting paladin who can smite. What if you had a hoe, and you could hit people with your farmer hoe? And so it goes back to this question of, is less more or is more, right? And we're right back to it, right? And the reality is they're like, oh, this black and white art is like an homage to the early Dungeons and Dragons. No, it just sucks. It just sucks, right? Like, and the reality is, like, when you look at the layout, they even have the ability to do good design layout, right? You could see it in these cards that they've designed, but they've surrendered, right? And they're like, we literally are going to take you back to old school black and white movies, black and white art, black and white world, right? And it just doesn't work, right? And then the writing is not nearly as good as what you would find. And the writing, and then even there, I think Kelsey Dion absolutely has the ability to write as good as any of the D&D designers right now, Jeremy Crawford or Amanda Heyman, right? Or Christopher Perkins. She could match them. But her hands are tied. She's like, I'm committed to this OSR thing. And the OSR is like, remember, dirt farmer, like, don't get too awesome. Don't put anything really exciting in there. It's got to be less, right? Less species options, less class options, less size on the page. Everything is less, right? And they're committed to it. They're just absolutely committed to it. And so I honestly believe, now the thing is, they lost, but at least they attempted it. At least they understood the moment they're in and said, okay, we need to do something. This needs to stop. We have to stop talking, and we have to start doing. And I really applaud the OSR for that. And I also applaud the OSR for failing. There's value in failure, right? And you're never going to beat D&D if you're not actually giving real attempts to beat D&D. And Shadowdark RPG is the first attempt out of the gate to beat Dungeons and Dragons. So my applause to the OSR for doing it. Thank goodness they failed, right? And I will say, I'm worried, right? Kelsey Dion, right? If she stays in the OSR and actually did a book with full color and allowed herself to, like, kind of reshape what the OSR is, she could be dangerous, right? But the reality is, I think she's going to wake up and realize, maybe I should just work for D&D, or maybe I should abandon the OSR and allow myself to be unleashed, right? So I think that's highly more likely than her continuing to have any success under the OSR. Every word, that's my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.